Being a single mom isn't easy, but it's worth every late night feeding, diaper change, and meltdown. My daughter Sophie had just turned 6 months old, and while I wasn't exactly getting full nights of sleep, I'd developed a routine that worked. Every evening, I'd put her down in her crib, turn on the baby monitor, and finally get a couple of hours to myself. That night in July, Sophie was sound asleep, her little chest rising and falling in the glow of her nightlight. I adjusted the baby monitor camera and retreated to the living room to binge watch a trashy reality show. The monitor sat on the coffee table beside me, its faint static noise a weirdly comforting background sound. About an hour into my show, I heard it. Sophie. It was hard to hear, like a whisper, but there was no mistaking it. My head snapped toward the monitor. The tiny screen still showed Sophie, snug in her crib, the room exactly as it was. I leaned closer, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. The voice was male, low and rasping, as though someone were speaking directly into the camera. My heart raced, and I felt the nausea creeping in. I grabbed the monitor, staring at the screen. The room was still. Sophie hadn't stirred. I stood, my legs shaking as I tried to figure out what to do. Was it a glitch? Could someone have hacked the monitor? That thought alone made me want to throw it out the window. But then I saw it. A shadow. Right next to Sophie's crib. It moved, just slightly, leaning closer to her. My breath caught. Without thinking, I sprinted to the nursery, adrenaline overriding every rational thought. The door burst open, and I flicked on the light. The room was empty. Sophie stirred and whimpered at the sudden brightness, but she was alone. No shadow, no intruder, nothing. I checked the window. It was locked from the inside, just as I'd left it. The closet? Empty. Under the crib? Nothing but a few forgotten pacifiers. I picked Sophie up, clutching her against me as I scanned the room, panic flooding my thoughts. Had I imagined the shadow? Was the voice just some bizarre interference on the monitor? I didn't know, but I couldn't bring myself to put her back in the crib. Instead, I carried her back to the living room and set her down in her playpen, keeping her within reach while I tried to calm down. That's when I heard it again, a faint knock on the living room window. I froze, my eyes darting toward the curtains. It was late, nearly midnight, and I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing ever happened. Slowly, I crept toward the window, my hands shaking as I peeled back the edge of the curtain. No one was there. The street was empty. I let the curtain fall and backed away, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would break through my ribs. I turned the monitor off, yanked the plug from the wall, and threw the entire thing onto the couch like it was cursed. My first thought was to call the police. But what would I even say? Hi, I think someone's talking through my baby monitor. Instead, I grabbed Sophie, my keys, and my phone. I wasn't about to stay in that house a second longer. I drove straight to my sister's place across town, Sophie dozing in the back seat. My sister, Jessica, didn't ask too many questions when I showed up at her doorstep with a diaper bag and an armful of baby gear. I gave her a vague explanation about monitor issues and spent the night in her guest room, barely sleeping. The next morning, I returned home with Jessica in tow. I didn't want to walk back into that house alone. Everything looked normal, just as I'd left it, except for one thing. The nursery window was unlocked. I know I'd locked it the night before. I always did. That's when I called the police. They didn't find anything. No signs of forced entry, no footprints outside, no evidence of anyone breaking in. The officer suggested it might have been a technical glitch with the monitor or a neighbor's device crossing signals. But that didn't explain the unlocked window or the voice whispering Sophie's name. The officer left with a polite but dismissive warning to stay vigilant. Not exactly reassuring. That evening, I replaced the baby monitor with a new high-tech model with encryption and a secure app. I also installed motion sensor lights outside the house and ordered a security camera for the front door. For a while, things were quiet. I told myself it was over, that it had been some bizarre one-off incident. But then a week later, as I was folding laundry in the living room, the new monitor crackled. Sophie. This time, I didn't hesitate. I called 911, locked every door and window, and waited on the couch with Sophie in my arms until the police arrived. They searched the house again, finding nothing. No intruders, no signs of tampering. But I knew what I'd heard. That night, I packed a bag for Sophie and me and drove straight to Jessica's house. I didn't know what to do next. Call a security company to install cameras and alarms, or call a priest to bless the house and drive out whatever might have been there. My mind was spinning. The thought of bringing Sophie back into that house made me sick. I ended up staying at Jessica's for 2 months. 2 months of awkward explanations to coworkers, 2 months of trying to figure out if I was being overly paranoid or if there really was something dangerous lurking in my home. Jessica didn't push me to leave, but I could see the concern in her eyes every time I jumped at the smallest noise. She knew I was scared out of my mind, and honestly, I think she was too. When I finally worked up the courage to return home, I made a silent promise to myself. Sophie would never be left alone again. Not for a second. I moved her crib into my bedroom and slept with a hand on her blanket. The baby monitor stayed in a drawer. I couldn't even look at it without my stomach knotting up. Months passed and nothing happened. No voices, no shadows, no strange noises outside the window. But the fear never fully left me. Every time I looked at Sophie sleeping, I felt this overwhelming relief that she was safe, and a gnawing unease that it could all happen again. Sometimes, when the house is quiet late at night, I find myself listening closely, searching for any sound in the silence. I'll sit there, my ears tuned to the faintest sound, and wonder if I did the right thing by coming back. Whether the threat was human or something else, I don't think I'll ever know for sure. But one thing is clear. I'll never let my guard down again. College wasn't exactly what I thought it would be. I'd pictured packed lecture halls, endless social events, and dorms full of life 24/7. But that winter night in Madison, it was the exact opposite. The snowstorm outside was relentless, and the dorm halls were eerily quiet, muffled by the thick blanket of snow outside. Most students had gone home for the weekend or were holed up in their rooms. My roommate Ryan had left earlier that day, heading to his girlfriend's place before the weather got worse. That left me alone in our tiny, slightly depressing dorm room. I was up late studying, or trying to. It was just me, my desk lamp, and my laptop. The snowstorm made everything feel heavier, quieter. Even the sound of my fingers tapping the keyboard felt too loud. Every so often, I'd look at the window, watching the snow pile higher on the ledge. It was peaceful in a way, but also unsettling. There was something about the silence that felt off. Around midnight, I decided to take a break. My back was stiff from hunching over my desk, and I needed to stretch my legs. I grabbed my water bottle and stepped out into the hallway. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a cold, yellowish glow. I made my way to the water fountain, filling my bottle and mentally reminding myself to stop procrastinating and get back to my essay. That's the exact moment when I saw it. At the far end of the hall, just past the dimly lit common area, stood a figure. It was barely illuminated by the light above it, but I could make out a shape. Tall, motionless, and facing my direction. For a second, I thought it might be Ryan. Maybe he'd decided to come back after all, though I hadn't heard the door open. "Ryan?" I called. The figure didn't move. It just stood there. I squinted, trying to get a better look, but the dim light made it hard to see any details. My stomach tightened as I waited for a response. Nothing. "Hey Ryan, is that you?" I tried again, louder this time. Still no answer. My hand gripped the water bottle tightly, and I took a step forward, trying to act like I wasn't completely unnerved. That's when the figure took a step back, retreating into the shadows at the end of the hall. The way it moved, it wasn't fast or jerky, just unnervingly smooth, like it was gliding. "Hello?" I called. I debated whether I should follow. My logical side told me to go back to my room, lock the door, and forget about it. But my curiosity, and maybe a bit of stupidity, got the better of me. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. Slowly, I walked toward where the figure had been standing. When I reached the end of the hall, there was nothing there, just the closed door to the stairwell. I pushed it open, shining my light down the stairs. Empty. Silent. I shook my head as if that would help me dismiss the unease. "You're just tired," I muttered to myself. "It's probably nothing." Back in my room, I locked the door behind me and sat down at my desk, staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't focus. I kept looking at the door, expecting it to open. And then it did. Or at least, the handle jiggled. I froze, staring at the doorknob as it moved ever so slightly, like someone was testing it from the other side. My heart was racing now. My breath caught in my throat. I grabbed my phone again, holding it like a weapon as I approached the door. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying hard to mask the fear in my voice. The jiggling stopped. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my ear pressed against the door, listening. There was no sound, no footsteps, no retreating figure. When I finally mustered the courage to open the door, the hallway was just as empty as before. But no matter how hard I tried, the feeling stuck with me. Like something was still there, just out of sight. I shut the door again, locked it, and this time slid my desk chair in front of it for good measure. My hands were trembling as I texted Ryan. "Hey man, you didn't come back to the dorm tonight, right?" "Nope. Why?" I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. If it wasn't Ryan, then who or what had I seen? Desperate for answers, I opened the dorm's group chat. I didn't want to seem like a paranoid freshman, so I framed it as a casual question. "Hey, has anyone else seen something weird in the dorm tonight, like someone walking around?" The replies came in almost instantly. "Weird you say that. I thought I saw someone standing outside my door last night, but when I checked, no one was there." "Dude, same here. I thought it was just my imagination." "Wait, this has been happening for a week now. I heard footsteps in the hall, but no one was there when I looked." My skin crawled as I read through the messages. Clearly, I wasn't the only one experiencing something strange, but no one seemed to have any answers. Just as I was about to respond, the lights in my room flickered. I looked up at the ceiling, my stomach tightening. The storm raged on, and for the rest of the night, I sat on my bed, every muscle tense, listening for anything, any sound, any sign that it might still be there. Nothing came. The next day, exhausted but unable to shake the memory, I decided to ask around. I started with my floor mates, feeling a little ridiculous at first, but as I brought up the figure, something changed. A girl down the hall looked up sharply. "You saw it too?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but there was a tremble in it that mirrored my own unease. Within an hour, a small group of us had gathered in the common area, each sharing our experiences. The details varied. Some saw it at the end of the hall, others swore it was standing in their doorways, but the figure was always the same: tall, dark, and silent. One guy said he thought it had whispered his name, but no one else mentioned hearing anything. What struck us the most was how selective the appearances seemed. Not everyone had seen it, and those who had couldn't pinpoint a pattern. It didn't matter what time of night, where you were in the dorm, or whether you were alone. It just showed up. After a couple of hours of comparing notes, someone suggested we all leave for the weekend, just to see if it made a difference. None of us argued. By that evening, the dorm was eerily empty, and we all stayed with friends or family, refusing to come back until Monday. When we returned, something was different. The dorm felt lighter, less oppressive. No one saw the figure again. It became a strange story we whispered about in the dining hall or late at night, a mystery we couldn't quite let go of. It's been a while, months actually, but I still think about it. Whatever it was, it left as suddenly as it came, almost like it was waiting for something. I'll probably never know what it wanted or why it was here, but I know this much: it wasn't just in my head. And that's what keeps me up some nights, staring at the door, wondering if, one day, it'll decide to come back. Working the night shift as a security guard isn't as boring as people think. Sure, it's monotonous at times, but I've always had my routine: patrolling the halls, watching the security cameras, checking the locks. It was the kind of job where nothing exciting ever happened, and that's exactly how I liked it. The building I worked in was a mid-sized corporate office in downtown Chicago. During the day, it was bustling with employees and the usual chaos of meetings and ringing phones. But at night, it became a ghost town. My shifts usually passed without incident, but that night in December 2021 was different. It started around 2 a.m., just as I was finishing my second patrol. I was sitting in the security office, scrolling through my phone and half watching the camera feeds, when I heard a loud creak followed by the sound of a door slamming shut. It was loud enough to make me sit up straight. The sound had come from the East Wing, a part of the building that was supposed to be locked down for renovations. No one should have been there. I leaned forward, staring at the camera feed for that hallway. The hallway looked empty. Then, movement caught my eye. A figure appeared on the monitor, walking slowly down the hall. It was wearing dark clothes. My stomach tightened as I watched it stop in front of one of the doors. It was the conference room that had been locked for weeks. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, my heart thudding in my chest as I made my way to the East Wing. The building's silence, which I'd once found comforting, now made my skin crawl. My footsteps echoed as I approached the hallway, my flashlight's beam carving a path through the shadowy hallway. When I reached the conference room, I froze. The door, which had been locked earlier, was now slightly ajar. "Hello?" I called out, pushing the door open with my foot. The room was dark, but the faint glow of the streetlights outside cast shadows across the walls. My flashlight landed on a single chair in the center of the room, positioned directly facing the door. I stepped inside cautiously, my pulse racing. The chair looked out of place, as though someone had deliberately moved it there. The air in the room felt colder than the rest of the building. I scanned the corners of the room, but there was no one there. Leaving the door wide open, I backed out of the room and decided to check the rest of the wing. The other offices and rooms were all locked, just as they should have been. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, nothing to explain what I'd just seen. I returned to the security office and rewound the camera footage. The figure was there, clear as day, walking down the hallway. But when they reached the conference room, the footage glitched. The screen went black for a few seconds before coming back, showing the hallway empty again. I kept playing the footage on loop, my fingers trembling as I tried to understand what I was seeing. The figure had disappeared into thin air. I switched to the feed from the security office, scanning for anything unusual. At first, everything looked normal. Then I noticed a shadow in the corner of the room. It was faint, barely visible, but it was there, and it wasn't mine. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping the office. The room was empty, but the uneasy feeling in my chest didn't go away. I locked the door and sat back down, keeping one eye on the monitors and the other on the room around me. The hours dragged on, with me on edge. At 4 a.m., just as I was beginning to convince myself that it was all in my head, the camera feed for the East Wing glitched again. When it came back, the figure was standing in the hallway outside the conference room. They weren't moving, just standing there, facing the camera. I froze, my eyes glued to the screen. The figure raised a hand slowly, as if waving, before turning and walking out of view. I grabbed the radio, calling my supervisor and telling them what had happened. They assured me they'd review the footage in the morning, but the lack of urgency in their voice only made me more anxious. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., I practically ran out of the building. That day, I slept with the lights on. The next night, I returned to work, determined to find some explanation for what I'd seen. I spoke to a janitor who'd been with the company for years, asking if he'd ever noticed anything strange in the building. "There have been stories," he said, lowering his voice. "People hearing footsteps in empty hallways, doors opening and closing on their own. They say the building's haunted, but I've never seen anything myself." That wasn't exactly the reassurance I was hoping for. Over the next few weeks, I kept a weapon in my desk drawer and refused to patrol the East Wing alone. The conference room remained locked, but every time I walked past it, I couldn't help but look at the door, expecting to see it open. I never saw the figure again, but the memory of that night stayed with me. To this day, I can't explain what I saw or why it happened. All I know is that the building, which once felt like a second home, now feels like a place I'll never fully understand. And every time I hear a door creak or see a shadow out of the corner of my eye, I wonder if it's still there, watching. Jogging at night had always been my thing. Some people find peace in yoga or reading, but for me, nothing beat the stillness of a late-night run. The streets were quiet, the air crisp, and the moonlight reflecting on the wet pavement made the city feel like it was mine alone. In a world that felt chaotic and noisy during the day, nighttime jogs gave me a chance to clear my head. I never worried about safety much. I knew my routes, kept my keys in my fist, and trusted my gut. I'd been running the same route through Grant Park for years. It was one of those sprawling urban parks with winding trails, tall trees, and enough open space to make you feel like you were miles away from civilization. I loved the sound of my sneakers hitting the gravel path. It was my escape, my time to be alone. Spring nights in 2020 were colder than usual, but I didn't mind. The chill kept me moving, and the park felt emptier than ever. Maybe it was the pandemic, or maybe it was the unusually cold air, but fewer people seemed to venture out at night. That was fine by me. I liked having the park to myself. I parked my car in the small lot near the entrance, tied my shoelaces tighter, and slipped my phone into the running pouch strapped around my waist. The sound of the zipper closing felt oddly loud in the silence. I checked the time, 10:47 p.m., earbuds in, music low, then started my run. The first stretch of the trail wound through a dense patch of trees before opening up near the pond. My playlist was going, the rhythmic thud of my feet keeping time with the beat. I was about a mile in when I first noticed the sound. Another set of footsteps. They were faint, blending with the crunch of my own shoes on the gravel, but they were there. At first, I thought nothing of it. It was a public park, after all. Other people ran here at night too. But as I rounded a bend in the trail, I looked over my shoulder out of curiosity. That's when I saw him, a runner, maybe 50 feet behind me. He was dressed in dark clothing with a hoodie. I focused back on the path, telling myself it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't like he was right on my heels or anything. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something about his pace matched mine perfectly. I sped up slightly, and so did he. When I slowed down to adjust my playlist, his footsteps mirrored the change. It felt less like a coincidence and more like a shadow. I turned down a side path, one I rarely used. A look over my shoulder confirmed what I already knew. He was still there. My stomach twisted, but I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. Maybe he just happened to be going the same way. Maybe he wasn't even aware of me. I took another unexpected turn, this time onto a gravel trail that cut through a small clearing. This was my test. If he was just another runner, he'd keep going straight. He didn't. He turned, following me onto the gravel path. That's when I knew something was off. I pulled out my earbuds and listened. His footsteps were steady, mirroring mine. The way he moved unsettled me. Not the casual, loose stride of a jogger, but something more controlled. Too measured, too in sync. It didn't make sense. I looked back again, catching a clearer look at him beneath a street lamp. He was dressed like any other runner. Black hoodie, running shoes. But he wasn't breathing heavily. No signs of exertion. Just an eerie, silent persistence. My brain shifted into overdrive. I wasn't panicking yet, but every instinct screamed at me to get out of there. I picked up my pace, my breath coming faster now. The path curved ahead, leading to a stretch where the streetlights were more spaced out. I pushed harder, trying to create some distance, but every time I risked a look back, he was still there. Same pace, same distance. That's when his footsteps vanished. One moment they were there, crunching against the gravel, and the next, nothing. Silence. I slowed, looking over my shoulder. The path was empty. I stopped completely, scanning the tree line, my pulse hammering in my ears. Had he ducked into the woods? Was he hiding? I turned in a slow circle, straining to hear anything, but the park had gone unnervingly quiet. No wind, just the distant sound of traffic beyond the trees. I took a step forward, then another. A footstep landed directly behind me. I spun, my phone's flashlight flicking on in my hand. The beam landed on him, just 10 feet away, standing in the middle of the path. Too close. Way too close. What the hell? I barked, stepping back. Why are you following me? He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at me. Dude, back off, I warned. I'll call the cops. No response. The way he stood, rigid, unmoving, sent something primal screaming through me. Then, slowly, he took a step forward. I didn't wait. I bolted. I ran harder than I ever had in my life. Muscles burning, breath tearing through my lungs. I barely registered the scenery blurring past me. The dim glow of the streetlights, the twisting path, the trees rushing by. My only thought was getting out of that park. The footsteps behind me pounded against the pavement, gaining speed. I cut left, veering onto a side trail that led toward the park exit. My car was just a few blocks away. If I could make it there, I'd be safe. Then I heard a sharp inhale, right behind me. A hand grazed my arm. Pure terror exploded in my chest. I tore forward with everything I had, adrenaline shoving the pain in my legs aside. I spotted the street ahead, headlights flashing past. Almost there. I burst onto the sidewalk, whipping around just in time to see the man stop abruptly at the edge of the park. He didn't step onto the pavement. He just stood there, hidden in the shadows, as if some invisible barrier kept him from following me further. A car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating his face. I wish I hadn't seen it. Beneath the cap, his features were twisted in a strange, blank expression. Mouth slightly open, eyes locked onto me with something that wasn't anger or malice, but something far worse. A detached, hollow curiosity. Then, just as quickly as I'd seen him, he backed up, vanishing into the trees. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, doors locked, engine running. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to slow my breathing. I checked the rearview mirror, expecting to see him standing there, but the sidewalk was empty. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that eerie stillness, the way he'd reached for me without a word. Who the hell was he? What would have happened if I hadn't run? I filed a police report the next morning, but there wasn't much they could do. No cameras in the park. No real description aside from a hoodie and a cap. Just another faceless stranger in the dark. I haven't jogged at night since. To this day, I can't drive past that park without scanning the trees, expecting to see him standing there. Maybe he was just some unhinged guy looking to mess with someone. Maybe it was something worse. All I know is that I got away. And I don't ever want to know what would have happened if I hadn't. If these stories gave you goosebumps or made you rethink late night strolls, smash that like button and share the chills with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you're the first to catch our next spine-tingling upload. Have your own creepy experience to share? Drop it in the comments or email me. I'd love to feature your story. Stay safe, stay alert, and remember, the night is darker than it seems. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.